So I'm delighted to be here. My name is Reverend Mark Fuss. I serve as Director of Admissions for Unity Institute and Seminary. My primary function there is working with folks who wish to become a licensed Unity teacher, who wish to become a minister, who are feeling the call, but also with anybody who's interested in spiritual development of any kind. I represent spiritual education at Unity Village. I also do most of the marketing and development work for Unity Institute, and I just want to do a little announcement before I move further. I brought some postcards that are out on the welcome table. One of the things that I'm most excited about that I get to do every year is lead a couple of trips on behalf of Unity Institute and Seminary. If you've ever considered spiritual travel, traveling with Unity friends, in years past, we've been to Egypt. Last year, we were in India, Sri Lanka, and Singapore. We've done shorter cruises. And so next year, I just want to mention two, if you feel called to do this. We're traveling down the Pacific coast of Mexico in March, a week at sea called SEE at Sea. You can take a Unity class or just hang out by the pool with Unity friends. That's in March, and then in September we're going to the heart of Europe. We'll be in Budapest, Vienna, and Prague. And our trips tend to be a spiritual retreat. We look at the history and the culture and even the mythology of some of the countries we visit. So that's my little plug. The cards are out there if you or anyone you know might enjoy traveling. I first met Sue back in 2004 and 2005 when I was doing my spiritual education and enrichment classes at Unity Institute. It was one of the first times that I came to Unity Village. I arrived there in 2006 to begin ministerial school and graduated in 2009. And when I graduated, I said, I'm not leaving. Find a place for me. I wrote my own job description, helped create the job of admissions and marketing director for Unity Institute. And it is my ministry and my passion to work with folks around spiritual education. This morning, before I move into the message, I want to ask you a couple of questions. And it's all about vibration. Do you remember the first time you walked into a Unity church? Do you remember the feeling? I see you have it painted on your doors. Welcome home. And we talk about that often in Unity, that when I found Unity, it was like coming home. My soul knew this was where I was supposed to be. I've been in Unity churches all across the country, and the story is much the same. The churches are not all the same. Each one has its own personality and its own unique take on Unity, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But do you remember that feeling? Can you just hold that feeling? And if you can put a word to it, acceptance, possibility, love, a warm hug, someone said to me once, and just hold the energy, hold that vibration. And the second question is, do you remember the Unity teacher, minister that had an impact on you? Maybe it's Sue. Maybe it's someone in a different church, wherever you came into Unity. But do you remember that individual and the impact that they had on your life? Two things. The feeling you had when you first found Unity, and the impact that we have on each other when we're sharing from our deepest truth. Can you imagine for just a moment the vibration in this room, that feeling, if everyone in Springfield could feel that? If everyone in Missouri could feel that vibration of love and warmth and possibility. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verse 15, Jesus said unto them, "Go into all the world and proclaim the good news to the whole creation." Now, when I was a seminary student, getting ready to graduate, we have to do annual licensing and ordination interviews where you get quizzed to make sure you're getting it. It's a very supportive process, challenging and supportive. But as we were going into that, one of my instructors said, what you're supposed to talk to them about is your good news, what you are taking out into the world. So that started me thinking, what is not only my good news, but what is the good news of unity? As a spiritual movement steeped in the legacy of the Fillmores, in spiritual healing, in prayer, and in education, what is the kernel, the nugget of our good news? Well, I want to share with you a short story that I think, for me, encapsulates unity theology beautifully. And it's a story called Acornology. And I first came across this in a wonderful little book called The Wisdom Way of Knowing by Cynthia Bourgeault. But this is the Mark version. Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, there was a kingdom of acorns beneath a grand oak tree. Now, since this kingdom of acorns was fully modernized and Western, they went about their business with a definite sense of purpose. And since they were midlife baby boomer acorns, they indulged in a lot of self-help courses. There were courses called Getting All You Can Out of Your Shell, and Who Would You Be Without Your Nutty Story? There were woundedness and recovery groups for those acorns that had been bruised in their fall from the great tree. And there were various acornopathic therapies for enhancing well-being and longevity. One day, in the middle of this kingdom, apparently dropped out of the blue sky by a passing bird, there dropped a naughty little stranger. He was dirty, he was capless, and he made an immediate negative impression on his fellow acorns. And to make matters worse, he stammered out this wild tale. He said, "We are that." Well, that's just absurd, said the other acorns. But since they were polite, they continued to engage him in conversation. "So tell us," they said, "how do we become the tree?" And he said, "Well, it has something to do with cracking open the shell and going into the ground." "Why, that's morbid," they said. "If we did that, then we wouldn't be acorns anymore." I love this story. An acorn is a seed. Its nature and its destiny is to become an oak tree. The amazing Jean Houston has said that we too are seedlings, seedlings of the divine. It's our nature and our destiny to become. To become. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that happens. We are that. We are the divine in action. Now, as you might imagine, we are that made for some juicy discussions in seminary. What do you mean? Are you saying we are God? The amazing H. Emily Cady, who wrote Lessons in Truth, said way back in the late 1800s, we are each a portion of God made manifest. We are that. Now, said a little differently, I like to say it this way. I am in God as a wave is in the ocean. I am some portion of God. I am not the totality, but I am God in expression and in becoming. And that means in awareness, that means in understanding, and that means in action, how I be with you in community. Constantly learning and growing, for we are each some portion of God made manifest. Now, this for me is the heart of our good news. And I lived most of my life painfully unaware of this good news. I was raised in the Southern Baptist tradition. And let me stop right there and say that I have come to a point in my life where I cherish my childhood in that tradition. I take from it what feeds me, what nourished me, what made me who I am today. So I'm not tearing down. But I will point out some differences. Let me back up a little bit. At age 16, in the Southern Baptist Church, and I was part of a large church, 500 members, 70-voice youth choir, 100-voice adult choir. It was a vibrant place. I was at church more than I was at home. If I wasn't at school or asleep, most likely I was at church. I loved the feeling of service, of giving back, and good music. And at age 16, painfully shy, I could be a part of a group, but you weren't going to put me out in front. I stood up in front of a church of 500 people during a revival and said, God's called me to be a minister. It's one of those moments, where you sit back down and you think, what did I just do? I went off after high school to seminary, my first attempt at seminary in the late 70s with Dr. Jerry Falwell at Liberty Baptist College. And about 2 years in, I had what I can only describe as a complete and total crisis of faith. You talk about a dark night of the soul. I was always the kid in Sunday school who was asking the questions. And in fact, at one point, I was told, sit down and stop asking questions. I could never make the theology work for me, that of a judgmental, vengeful God. And there were other circumstances. My father died from cancer when I was 19. And I walked out of the doors of church and seminary and said, you got the wrong guy, God. Not only that, but there is no God. If you can't love me as you created me, there is no God. And that's how I lived my life for over the next 2 decades. I put together a pretty stellar career in retail, moved to Manhattan with Williams-Sonoma, opened stores for them all over the Northeast. But at the same time, I added multiple addictions. So life became a bit of a roller coaster. Every time I built something or I became something, I would tear it down because I didn't deserve it. The embedded theology hadn't changed. I didn't have a new message to hold on to. And I remember a Sunday morning about 4 o'clock in late 1999. This would have been November of 1999, not that long ago. Homeless in the streets of New York. The jobs were long gone. Deeply addicted. I'd run out of friends with sofas. I'd abused every friend I had. And I found myself on a park bench. And I remember hearing a voice as clear as a bell say, something has to change or you're going to die. And the very next thought was, there has to be something more than this. So I did what every self-respecting 40-year-old man does when he's in trouble. I picked up the phone and called my mother, who sent a bus ticket. And by Christmas of 1999, I was living in Panama City, Florida with my little brother, his wife, and my 3-year-old niece, whom I credit with a lot of my cracking open. If you don't think going to sleep every night hearing, "I love you, Uncle Mark," as the very last thing you hear will crack you open. And I have to say, I had plenty of walls, 22 years of walls. But I began that process. And actually, it was an interesting book, The Celestine Prophecy, that I credit for being my doorway back in to all things spiritual. I wanted nothing to do with religion or dogma. But I was open to a spirituality in nature, a vibration of goodness and wholeness. And so for 2 years, I dried myself out. I put my life back together. I actually held a job for the first time in several years. And one Saturday, I opened the newspaper, and there it was. A full-page article and a half-page picture on Unity of Panama City. And they had just built a new building, and the Audubon Society had given them an award for the way that they honored the land. They built on 13 acres of wetland, half of it was wetlands. I thought, wow, a spirituality in tune with nature, that sort of fit where my head was. It took me 6 months to work up the courage to set foot. It was a church, after all. It had been a long time. And I so clearly remember the energy, the feeling when I walked through the doors of a spiritual community very much like this one. That love and that acceptance and that sense of possibility. I sat on the back row in my shorts and sandals. This is Florida, after all. And I cried through the whole service. I couldn't have told you what I was crying about. You know, my mind couldn't wrap itself around what I was hearing that day. But I remember Reverend Joanne, not only was I in church, but there was a woman minister, which was foreign to me, coming from the Southern Baptist tradition. A wonderful, sweet, silvery, silent presence that could look into your soul. Made me want to run screaming from the building. But I remember Reverend Joanne saying, "We're not here to tell you what to believe. Take what works for you, what you can practically apply in your own life, and leave the rest." That was exactly what my non-dogmatic heart needed to hear. And I remember hearing, "I behold the Christ in you." And I remember when they did greet your neighbor, they would all have each other turn around and say, "I behold the Christ in you." And I had to resist the urge to look over my shoulder to see who they were talking about, because that was not the picture that I had of myself. And I remember Joanne saying, "Wherever you are, God is." Now, at the time, it was my understanding was more of, God's with me in my pocket kind of thing. There was still quite a bit of separation between me and any divinity. And now I have a different understanding, that I am some portion of God made manifest. How I be in the world is how God shows up. And I remember you can change your life by changing your thinking. And wow, was that something to wrap my mind around. There was an affirmation that the church was using at the time. I am a powerful, creative spiritual being, and you talk about something new to hold on to. I am a powerful, creative, spiritual being. And I can say that with conviction now. It was a little different back in 2000. But I would drive to work. I had a job that didn't particularly feed me, but I would drive to work and I would say it over and over like a chant. I am a powerful, creative, spiritual being. And at some point, things began to change in my life. You can change your life by changing your thinking. You know, I said it before, I really couldn't wrap my mind around everything that day. But my heart said, yes, yes, yes. And I think that's a very key point for us in Unity to think about. Because we have teachings, we have a unique way of looking at Christianity and the world. But that's not what often attracts people to us. What attracts people to us is the environment created by those teachings, by welcome home painted on the front door, by your welcoming smile when someone walks in. It's the environment created by those teachings that attracts people to us. And only then do they say, how does this work? It's that piece of what can I apply in my life? What can make a difference in my life? You know, I make no bones about the lack of dogma being what attracted me. Charles Fillmore once said, I reserve the right to change my mind. Because when I'm growing in consciousness and in awareness, how can I stay where my thoughts were then? We could send that vibration to Washington today. Myrtle Fillmore once said, I am decidedly eclectic in my theology. Is it not my right to be so? Apparently Charles had challenged her theology when they were courting. That was her response in a letter. Is it not my right to be so? Love, acceptance, warmth, community, that sense of possibility of becoming, just as the sunlight pulls the little oak seedling from an acorn into an oak tree. The unity experience is that light, is that love, is that nourishment that pulls individuals into a state of becoming. Now, there's another key point here is, it's been pointed out before that sometimes people come to Unity in a state of crisis. They get over the crisis and we don't see them again until there's another crisis. And I think that's another key point is, I believe it was Michael Beckwith from Agape who said, in life we are pushed by pain until we choose to be pulled by a vision. And that's the piece of becoming that's so important, is it has to be something that we own. We do the work. And sometimes that means doing our shadow work, looking at how we are with each other. The way out is through sometimes, through the difficult times. I will point out that every time that I've experienced spiritual expansion in my life, it's been when I was willing to crack open and go into the ground of my being. My ministry, my personal spiritual mission is to facilitate that cracking open process, that spiritual expansion into a place of wholeness and goodness. That is unity's good news. The point of spiritual growth is to express who we have come here to be on the face of the earth. Jesus spoke of the innermost I am, your essence identity. Christian mystics called it the Christ within. The Buddhists call it the Buddha nature. For the Hindus, it's Atman, the indwelling God. We are that, the gospel of unity. And he said to them, go into all the world and proclaim the good news to all of creation. Namaste.